Test, test.
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah. All right, so welcome everybody to the session in the afternoon. My name is Boris Scholl. I'm a lead program manager on the Cloud Platform Tools team. I'm here with Claude, who's a group program manager on the Cloud Platform Tools team. And today I think we're going to have something really exciting for you. So we're going to talk about, the title of the session is really Managing Cloud Environment and Application Lifecycle using Azure Tools and Visual Studio Online. So we're going to start out with talking about Visual Studio Tools and Azure Resource Manager support, but then we're going to get to the exciting part, and this is when I hand over to Claude. And Claude's going to make an announcement about a brand new service offering that we're building as we speak. So I hope this is going to be really cool for you guys because you're the first ones to know about it. All right, so please don't forget to submit your evaluation, and that'd be greatly appreciated. All right, so as for the agenda, I briefly touched on it. So we're first going to do an Azure RM overview. How many of you know about Azure Resource Manager? All right, quite a few. So I'm going to touch briefly on it because it's really important that you understand some core concepts there, because you will benefit from that throughout the session. Then I'm going to give you a very brief demo about our Azure RM tools, and maybe you have seen them already in Mark Rosinovich's talk, or there are a bunch of talks where those tools were shown. So, but I'm just going to do it again just to set the stage. And then we're going to do this dev test service announcement. This is when Claude takes over and talks you guys through our new service offering that we are thinking about. And he even has some working bits that he can demo. And then we're going to talk about like how we think we integrate like the Visual Studio client tools that I'm going to show with the dev test service that Claude's team is working on. Sound good? All right. So let's step back a little bit and think about a traditional application lifecycle. I mean, this is very familiar to most of you, especially if you're developers or even like if you're ops people. So first you're going to design something, then you develop it. Then you go into like almost a loop. The developer tests it and then fixes some bugs, tests it again. Then the developer thinks, hey, this is a great build, and he pushes it into a staging environment. Then in a staging environment, you're going to do some other tests, like user accepting tests and so on and so forth. And then it goes into a deploy stage. It goes into production. And in production, the life cycle isn't over. You actually need to do some monitoring. And based on the monitoring, you manage your service, you do some scaling things if it's needed, and then you learn. This is really the new way. So based on the monitoring, it's not just trying to diagnose your service, it's really also about understanding how your service is being used, how you can implement new features and make those features available. So what that slide actually says is that the Visual Studio family provides you everything you need for every single stage. And you can start with a Visual Studio IDE, as I show you, and it goes all the way up to Visual Studio Online and the dev test service. But the key here is really to think about what you need to do with your application and your environment is you need to provide artifacts and common storage to consume, that can be consumed throughout the pipeline. So you don't want to change all the things like your environment definition all the time. All you really want to change in an environment definition, for example, is, let's say, the name of the environment. You want to maybe change the size of a server and so on and so forth. But you don't want to change the entire, repository of your artifacts and your deployment again. So by defining like a common template or a common approach for your environments, you're going to ensure consistency throughout that lifecycle. And this is really what Azure Resource Manager is about. So if you think about a traditional way, has everybody seen the old portal? Like this picture looks familiar? So this is a very resource-centric view, right? But if you go in there, what's really the problem with that view? And it's not that I spend way too much money internally because I have so many resources.
I think the problem is it's too small, but that's just me.
Yeah, so it's really like if you think about all those errors, point to resources that are part of an application. But with the current resource-centric view, you don't see that, right? Because they're basically individual resources, and you don't see anything that keeps them together, grouped together. It's really hard. With that, you also run into different problems because you don't know that all those resources belong together. You actually have to provision all the resources individually, right? So think about you're going to provision your application server individually. You change some endpoints and things like that, and your web server doesn't know about it. So it gets you in a lot of trouble there. So management of this resource is really challenging, and we've heard that from customers over and over again. It starts just with a viewing problem because we had customers complain saying, hey, I have 5 to 10 cloud services, I have virtual machines, I have storage accounts, but I have currently no way to see that those things fit together. And that's really a problem. The isolation itself, as I mentioned, makes the communication between those things very challenging because you don't really have a depends-on mechanism, right? So think about you want to have a SharePoint farm, for example, and you need an active directory domain controller for that. But in the current model, there's nothing that says, hey, before you provision a SharePoint server, you need to have an active directory server, right? You would need to write all that stuff yourself. You would need to ensure you have the provisioning logic. You would need to make sure you have the right steps, the right dependency, and everything. So this is really time-consuming. With Azure Resource Manager, we're really thinking we address most of the problems. So what it really is, I mean, for those of you, and look like many of you know what it is, it's just a repeat. But you can think about it as an application lifecycle container. So you basically put all your resources in a resource group, so to say, and that resource group lives within or is being provisioned by the Azure Resource Manager. And by doing that, you have really all the resources that make up an application or a service grouped together. The other thing is, instead of using imperative approach like writing a bunch of PowerShell scripts, you can also use a declarative approach, which means you have a very familiar JSON language to define a template, and that template actually defines your environment. That's very convenient because you have everything grouped together, you can see what makes your environment, and then you can basically provision it. The other thing that's really important, Azure Resource Manager is a little bit more than that because it's really a consistent layer, consistent management layer. And when we say consistent management layer, you've probably heard the announcements throughout the week. So Azure Resource Manager will not only work in public cloud, but will also bring the Azure Resource Manager to private cloud. What that means is you define your environment as a template, and you can provision the very same template in your private cloud, in your data center as well in Azure. So this is a huge productivity gain, and it also ensures consistency. So for those of you who have seen the Visual Studio tools, we had Azure Resource Manager support for Azure websites or Azure web applications, as it's called now. But to be completely honest, for most customers, especially enterprise customers, that wasn't really super appealing. So this week, we actually released the Azure Resource Manager support for virtual machines preview, for virtual network, and for storage. So that means you're now able to really spin up rich environments based on infrastructure as a service, which wasn't there before. So that's why it's a really good step. It's still in preview, but it works very well. So a very common or very important concept, I touched on it briefly, of Azure Resource Manager is really Azure Resource Groups. So what are resource groups? As I mentioned, resource groups are tightly coupled containers of multiple resources of similar or different types. So as you can think about, you build, let's say, a multi-tiered application. You have a web server, you have an application server, and you have a database layer. You can put everything together in a resource group, and Azure Resource Manager will make sure that your entire environment gets provisioned. But it's even better, it takes one step further. As I mentioned before, if you have to spin up an Active Directory domain controller as part of your environment, you can tell, and it's in that resource group, you can actually make sure that this is that your your Active Directory server is available before it starts provisioning the SharePoint server or web server. The thing, it's even better because think about now you have a complex environment, and now you might think, hey, great, Boris is telling us how great that is, and I build a template and I provision it. Is it going to provision everything again? No, it's not, because if you already have resources provisioned through Azure Resource Manager and you provision the template a second time, it will actually detect which resources are there and which resources have changed and only apply the changes to the changed resources or create the new resources. So to summarize, this is really a very brief overview of Azure Resource Manager and why it's a great thing. There have been many talks this week. There was an Azure Resource Manager talk today about from Ryan Jones. So I would highly encourage you to look at that talk because he goes into more detail. But again, this was just for setting the stage. Now I'm going to switch over to a demo so that I talked a lot. Now you can see what it means, and then we'll hand it over. Sounds good?
Great.
All right, so here we have Visual Studio. Visual Studio has installed the Azure SDK 2.6, which was released, I think, today or yesterday. And if I go in here, I go new project, and as you can see, we have a new project type. It's called Azure Resource Group. So let's take the out SharePoint form. Let's create a new resource group. Hit OK. So the next thing that happens will bring up a dialog that gives you a bunch of templates as starting points. And this is like right now, I think we have a list of 8 to 10 templates, but you can think about we're going to add more and more templates over time. In fact, there are a bunch of Azure RM templates already available. The reason why I'm mentioning that, it's very important when Claude takes over, because we want to show that we integrate not just with Visual Studio and Dev Test Service, but that the Dev Test Service and the Visual Studio tools will integrate with GitHub and fully support ARM. But for now, let's just grab Azure Virtual Machine. So it creates a new project, and for those of you who are concerned and say, hey, I just want to provision an environment, I don't need Visual Studio for that, the reason why we have a project at that point is really just to hang off our folders and documents. So you could technically copy the entire content and put it somewhere else. There is at that point no dependency on Visual Studio. So let's go to the templates folder. In the templates folder, I have a Windows Virtual Machine.json, and I have a Windows Virtual Machine.param.dev. So if I open the Virtual Machine.json and go here, you'll see a nice little JSON outline view. So that template that I just opened really represents your Azure Virtual Machine now. So what we've done in Visual Studio is we give you a nice little, what we call JSON outline, and a JSON outline view, there should be actually icons now, but I think it's probably due to the network. So that JSON outline view gives you a pretty good navigation pane throughout your JSON template, because as you can think about or imagine, the more sophisticated that template gets, the more JSON is in there, the harder it is to read. So with that JSON outline view, we think we're going to give you a very good tool to help navigate through the JSON and add resources. So for that example, I just want to have I have the virtual machine. The virtual machine is just a plain Windows Server, 2012 R2. What I really want to do is I want to add a DSC script to it to configure IIS, because it doesn't have it. So I just want to show you how easy that is. In here, I can say add new resource. So I'm going to add a new resource, PowerShell DSC extension, and I'm calling it IIS-config. Okay. So I'm going to add the resource, and as you can see, the editor takes me right to that extension here, to my DSC extension. The next thing that I need to do is I need to tell the DSC extension which machine it needs to run on. So I'm going to go in here, and then I'm going to say machine name, and then the machine name. I'm going to use a variable that's already there. So the syntax for that is variables, and then I'm going to do this, VM name. So this variable is already defined in the JSON. So what I'm doing here now is basically telling the extension, okay, run the extension on that virtual machine. So the next step would be, I'm going to add the actual script that configures IIS on the machine. I'm going to grab an existing item, go to Azure, to my DSC scripts, configure X web server, add the script. So this is basically just a PowerShell script that configures DSC. If you look at it, it's just adding some Windows features to it. So clicking on it, putting it as content. And the next step that I need to do in here is I need to tell my deployment script, because the good thing here is Visual Studio, as I mentioned, has no dependency. There is no dependency from our Azure RM tools to Visual Studio. So we are literally using PowerShell to deploy. So you can take the PowerShell script and customize it. So going in here, this is the PowerShell script. And in here, I'm going to add a, let's see if I have it in the toolbox. No, of course not. In here, I'm going to add a line that basically tells PowerShell, hey, there is a DSC script that you need to execute when you basically provision a server and start DSC. So those were the 3 steps, and then I'm ready to deploy. I can actually go in here and say deploy. We have a nice little deployment wizard. Go to deploy, pick Azure IaaS as my subscription, create a new one, West US. And then I have to fill in a bunch of parameters. So I have to put in a new storage account name. I'll call it demo 3. Let's do. Make sure that it's unique. Okay. Then I'm going to put in an admin username, password, and then the public DNS name. And then the last piece I need to do is I need to tell it, okay, there's my IaaS configuration file. What is my IaaS configuration file and my IaaS configuration function? So let's copy that over quickly. This basically, the file will be zipped and uploaded to a storage account that I enter in a second. And then the next step is I just need to say, okay, which function I want to execute. I'll do main. Save password, save. Take the storage account that I want to upload the package to, the DSC package to, and then I hit deploy. And then it basically starts deploying, and I already, because of the sake of time, I already deployed one project here. As you can see, we execute PowerShell, you get this nice little output here. And then you have created a virtual machine with IaaS enabled through Azure Resource Manager. So as you can imagine, you can do this with very complex environments through our tools. You can start with environments, Azure RM templates, you pull them down. And then the next step would be really to have some great governance, control, really a great dev test lab. So this takes us to the second part of the session, which I'm going to hand over to Claude.
All right, thanks. So hi, everyone. So actually, what I'll do is I'll talk a little bit about how we're doing our dev test environment on Azure for us at Microsoft. And when I say Microsoft, let's bring it down at DevDiv. So basically, I'm part of DevDiv. We are both part of DevDiv. And actually, we've been using a tool internally for a little while. And over the last year, basically, we created that cloud for our dev test VM. And basically, we're kind of doing well with it. We're getting like emails unsolicited from our user base in DevDiv. So we have 2,000 people or a little more, a little less. And basically, we're getting comments like this. And we're getting comments like this. Basically, the base service we have, the base idea is that we're able to try and quickly create VMs when we need them. And we have a number of things to do that. We're also kind of getting really a lot of great comments. And actually, we're getting such a good reception internally that actual usage with no internal marketing really kind of just skyrocketed over the last year. So if you look at it right now, we have like 4,500 VMs. So that's a screenshot I took like yesterday, I think. We have a number of metrics there, a number of users. So those are all our developers where basically our need beyond just creating a VM, if you think about a dev team, is that I need to create a VM, I need to add a number of things to it, which are kind of stable, standard things, like in our case, Office and things of that nature. And then we want to put the latest version of our code. We're building Visual Studio or services or whatnot. So that's kind of the difference between vanilla Azure, where you can go and start a VM, but in dev, you need your VM plus your stuff. So basically, that's kind of what we've been doing internally and very successfully. So at some point, somebody says, well, why don't we productize this? And basically, that's what we're doing. So what we're announcing today is we're going to start very shortly a private preview with customers using our own internal tools that we're basically will make available as an Azure service so to create the different dev test environment. The way to think about it, the base principle we have, and that seems to be working from our own experience, is that we have this idea of, Azure is there and we have multiple ways to go and we can create ARM file, as Varian showed, and deploy to Azure from Visual Studio. But what we're creating is kind of this idea of a lab, which is a new object in Azure, where it has a number of, instead of having like in a on-prem lab fixed resources, you have a number of boxes. Actually, in Azure, we create the lab, and we're able to set some quotas and some policies on it, saying you can create so many VMs on that lab, and you can use these type of base images that you can have. And out of all the templates available, these are the ones that my team will be using. So the way we look at it is really a way to say, I want to get to Azure, I want to use Azure for my test environment throughout the life cycle, but let's do that in a more controlled environment where I don't have the choice of the universe, but somebody who owns the lab on the team might be a dev lead, a dev manager, a DevOps server. You look at it, somebody on the team will go and set, this is the base, this is how we work, these are the templates interesting to us. Not unlike somebody who sets up the automated pipeline or somebody who sets up the build definition. And the idea is you set it up once, and then you're kind of feel free to work inside of it. So it makes the self-service very easily and kind of safe from both sides. As a developer, you're creating VMs, and you get warnings if you're getting too close to the max as a team or individually. And at the same time, if you're on the paying side, you basically know that the team will not go and create a bunch of G5s and let them run over a weekend and burst your budget in 3 days. So that's kind of sitting somewhere in the middle. And the key, what also I want to make clear is that the way we think about it is like basically you can go to Azure. It's like you can go to an island in Hawaii, or actually this one is in Hawaii, and basically it's great. There's suns, there's beaches, there's everything you want. And when we think about when we create kind of the lab object, it's almost like you create your own resort on a given set of beach where your team's going to go and do some different things. So you have your own little space in there, and in that area you set up kind of your rules of behavior. So what you can do, what you cannot do. Like if it's a adult only where you can have drinking with no kids, then that's going to be a different one than the other. I don't know if you guys think if you could create a resort with whatever rules you could, what those rules would be. Mine would be a lot of beautiful women with no taste in men. That would work for me. So anyways, so that's kind of the mindset. So we're not saying you go to the lab or you go to Azure. It's just we're basically on the same island. It's just a subset that basically you create, like you're fenced in. You have some rules in there that you feel basically you have your specific subset of templates and policies. So I'll show basically what we're working on and what kind of the version 1 that we're going to go in private preview very shortly with. All right, so here I'm on the Azure portal, the new version that is in preview. And from there, what we'll do on the plus is we'll create dev test labs. So here our team name is Q, and basically we created that team lab where we have our stuff, basically our different VMs. So, and the first thing you do as a developer in the morning to go and get to VMs is basically you'd get into the lab. And actually what we show you is, one of the scenario is, I'll go and I have existing VMs that might be running or they might have been shut down. and then I can just go on the VM, and then from there go and connect to it, restart it, and so on and so forth, or get into the detail of the VM itself and start working on it. So that's basically would be a common scenario. And then you connect to it, you can work with it. It might be the same VM in the experience that Boris showed. The only difference is that if you go through that experience and you do it in the lab, we'll apply the policies and the resources and the elements we have there. If you notice here, we have another concept, which that one is really popular internally. So what we do is at the end of the build overnight, we have the new version, the latest bits of Visual Studio, and basically we go and we create a number of pre-made VMs for the next day. So they're created, they're shut down. So in the morning, what you do, if the VM you're working with the last couple of days is fine, and you've put something on it, you keep it in My VMs. But if you want one with the latest bits, then you just go down here and you claim the VM. So you just pick the VM, you claim it, it opens it up, and now you go and start working on that VM. So now it's yours, it's off of the pool of pre-created VM. And what we do in Azure is we start them, we create them, and then we keep them in a shutdown state so it doesn't cost too much. And then when you start working on it, that's where basically you start working with it. So that's kind of the second scenario. So you don't have to go through installing Visual Studio Office and whatever yours would be. So if you have multiple VMs that create your environment, you might have to install a lot of things. So if you can prepare that again will make you faster to get to your testing state or testing environment. Another way to create a VM, and again, I'm taking VM as an example. Our goal is in the private preview, and when we'll go public preview a little later, it's going to be either VM or containers, or an ARM file with very complex environments. So I'll continue talking about more VMs, but keep in mind that basically we're engineering for both VMs and container. Who here is already using containers? All right. Who here is interested or planning to use containers? Interested. All right. Okay. Okay. So I think we picked OK. All right. But yeah, it's coming containers. So we're building with them as we're building for VM. So here, if I want to create a VM, again, from the team, we have a number of templates that are available. We can create our own templates and then pick from them. So what we basically do in the lab is we'll set these are the templates we want to appear to the team when we do that. Out of all the templates available, from Docker Hub or from Azure, or the ones we created ourselves, or ARM templates that we put in source control, that we authored through Visual Studio. Out of all of these are the ones that my team might be interested in. And then from there, you can pick a template, and from the template, very similar to what Boris showed, you still need to give a VM name, an admin, and a password. And then we because we start with a template, we prepare all default value on everything, and then at the end, you can go, if you take, as the template is, you go create, and then the creation will start. You notice here, we have kind of an extra field there, which I was reading it this afternoon. It's a scheduled shutdown opt-out. So basically, I'll show that later, but you can set automatic shutdown of VMs, either if they're not used or at certain times of day. What we encounter, though, is that some VMs you create to run automated tests, if we shut them down, we lose the memory state. So you can say, well, that's a VM I'm creating to run automated tests that I don't want the automatic shutdown to be applied to. I'm not sure if that's proper English, but anyways. Then in that case, you would just basically opt out of the automatic shutdown. If you look at when you create the lab, by default, you have a number of artifacts, basically, which would be the softwares you install on top of it that come with the definition of the template itself. And if I want, I could go and override them or pick what's there. For example, in this case, I'm going to pick those two software, one install at creation. And I have these 3 ones which are locked in. Those are actually, the slight difference is they're baked in. So we can upload an image on Azure and then make that into a template. And then that image, if I have 2 or 3 software already installed, the advantage is that at starting, we're starting with the software already in, so we don't need to wait for the install. However, it's going to be the version at the time we baked it in. So if you wanted to refresh with the latest version, you basically add them at creation. If not, then you can bake them in for a period so that you get them faster. All right, so that's pretty, again, another way to create a lab VM. Creating a container would be fairly similar, using templates and then basically adding the different layers on it and creating them. In those experiences, I mentioned a few things that we can set up, so I'll go quickly over it around kind of this idea of what we can set up on the lab. So we can set quota for the lab itself, and kind of at the same time, there's something that's maybe not obvious, is that you go on Azure and you create a subscription for your labs, so that what we do at the same time is that if the subscription is used for labs, we actually remove the right to create regular VMs. You can go and create into other subscription if you want, but basically for us to maintain that on the subscription, you have the maximum and so on and so forth, which is basically saying, hey, in my little area of Azure, this is what we're applying basically, and we're using the subscription as our initial scale unit, but you can have multiple labs on it. So in your organization, you say that's the sub where we put all our labs, and then you have the different labs. You can also invite customers or subcontractors to Azure to participate in the lab. Again, that's fine. They'll just come in, they'll be able to pick VMs, use templates, but we'll probably not have the rights, the admin rights to set up policies on the lab. So we have things here where we have a budget we can fix. The role of the budget is to help us do, actually I'll just go back, but the role in here is that we're actually giving you on the main blade tracking of how many VMs you have, if you know, are you running out of them vis-a-vis your quotas, how many are idle, and so on and so forth, but also to be able to track how you're doing against budget. So we're looking at how you're burning. And again, there is in Azure a lot of tracking we have on dollars, but this one just takes it and we bring it from the lab itself. So usually for your team, it's pre-organized. So you can do tags on Azure, you can do by resource group, and here we're just giving you another summary, and then we're projecting it to say, hey guys, you look like you're gonna run out of money at the rate you're doing, so either go look at your quotas or basically take action and decide what you're doing. And again, we're going to have a number of other metrics and reports as we have on the slide I showed earlier. The other thing we can set in the quota is the number of VMs per person and the number of VMs that you can have for the whole lab. We can set which VM sizes that the people can use. So basically what we found internally, and we'll see what more customers using it, is that often you go, well, for our app, this is the right size for it, or these are the two, and then basically instead of offering everything and asking every developer to understand every pricing plan, somebody needs to figure it out and say, yeah, we're using, for us, we're using A2s for this, and we're using A4s for that. And basically that's what's going to be available when we create VMs. Again, always the idea of pushing the complexity to a few people, and then you just use it as you go. For the lab, you also can go and set up where you want us to put, when we create templates, if you save a template from a VM, we save everything in source control. So you associate a source control to each of the lab, and that's where we're going to get the templates, push back the templates. Same thing with the artifacts, so that basically it can be shared if you go from Visual Studio, if you go from release management, build. It's basically this idea of every template is saved, and all our templates, it's an ARM template. Right? So that, again, it's becoming our common language for creating and managing and defining environments on Azure. Again, I was talking about the shutdown, so we can shut down based on idleness or based on a certain point in time during the day as we leave. We think here we already have some conversation to add many options there, and maybe some scheduling for the weekend for this and so on and so forth. Again, the idea is to help you not spend where you don't need to. Artifact, I'll go quickly. We talked about them, but basically this is where you add new artifacts, so somebody does it. And again, when Boris showed it, it's not that obvious to create a new ARM template for anything, for everything. So you'll need to learn that, but you can have somebody on the team learn it, create the ARM pieces that you need, and then when the developers and the testers, they just pick the component, the ARM section that comes with it, we're just composing your bigger ARM with it. So basically it becomes more of a composition. So somebody writes the detail bottom up, and then you just assemble them into new templates by just saving them. So that's the idea. So here, this is where you would go and add the template, and then supply the script that you've created with it, and the parameters that are in the scripts you would set. And then you, as I showed, when you pick a new VM, you just go and pick which components you want to add, and basically we'll just assemble, put together the pieces you have into the one ARM template. So that's basically kind of overall kind of give you a sense of what we're looking at doing. And we're going to start inviting people on that trial very, very shortly. So I'll just go back to PowerPoint. And now I'm using this guy still, or, oh, sorry. Man. So if you look at what we're trying to do with the service and what our experience was, first is that idea of the worry-free. So basically, that's kind of one of the main thing is worry-free for you, the developer. You know, you're taking what you have, you compose from other people, you create what you need, and you know you're not breaking policies, and from the people paying, also a sense that, you know, there are some guardrails on what we're doing, and we're not burning dollars for no reason. So that's kind of the first one we're trying to do. The second thing is really that faster provisioning. So baking in things in there, pre-doing VMs ahead of time so that you can just claim them, using containers. Those are all things that will really help the development teams getting their environment a lot faster. And again, we can be integrated inside of your automated release pipeline. I'll talk about that in a minute. But also it makes it easier than to use Azure for all your testing environment throughout the pipeline. Here, again, the other thing is this idea of trying to separate the complexity to a few people and then just have everybody use it. Usually, it's like a build script or a release pipeline. You create it once, and then you're going to use it. Every other people will use it. Then you have a new component, you have a new thing, you write it up, and then you just add it to the list, and you start using it. So basically, we found out in our usage, it's very simplified because not everybody on every team needs to figure out and become expert at writing ARM for everybody to get the benefits of ARM, that single language for everything. And the last point we're doing is, and I haven't mentioned that, but is really to integrate into your existing tool chain. So what I showed was the UI that we're planning, but at the same time, we're also building a full command line with a full REST API. And the idea is that we need to be invocable from build, from release, from Jenkins, from basically any other source that you're running your pipeline with. We're building this to run both for Windows and Linux, and so that basically at the end of the day, if you, for example, I'll show quickly the integration in Visual Studio, but we'll have an integration in IntelliJ and Eclipse so that you can go and basically deploy to these guys inside the lab with applying everything. So I just put one from the demo Boris did. I decided not to redo the demo again. But basically, if you look here, the difference is that instead of deploying to Azure, so instead of going to the island, I'm going to the resort. So if you pick deploying to the lab, then here you pick your lab, you pick the template from the lab, and from there, then basically it's the same thing. On the template, we have a JSON, we have some parameter files that comes with that template. You don't need to specify the storage account. We do that once when we create the lab, so we can infer that for you, and then basically you just go and create it. And then basically it's going to deploy to the lab itself. The main difference, though, is that if you send an ARM that you create and push it through Visual Studio, and you try to create your 21st VM, and you're allowed 20, then we're going to push it back and say, well, you're breaking your policy. Or if you just put an alert, we'll send an alert, say, hey, Claude just created the 21st one, so he's kind of starting to consume a lot. So basically, we'll still apply everything to the ARM. We'll read it. So that's, again, because we're still going to the island, but we're going to the resort and applying the policies there. How many of you have seen the new release management and build from VSO yesterday? Okay, so about a third or so. So I'll just talk briefly about it. So when we're looking at the pipeline and release management, it's available on-prem and on Visual Studio Online. Basically, what we're doing is we're building once our app, and we're deploying to all the stages one after the other in a succession. And what we want to do is build once, deploy many times. And what you do in RM is you set for every stage or environment, you go through a series of actions that you want to accomplish or tasks. And what we showed yesterday is that basically both build and RM now have an extendable task catalog on which you can basically pick different tasks that you can do as part either when you build and deploy or as part of going to integrated and staging and user acceptance tests and whatnot. So our integration in there, the idea if you're using an Azure lab, you'll have the same choice. You'll be able to say, here, take an action and say, I'm deploying to standard Azure, or I'm deploying directly into a lab. And again, the same thing. If you go to the lab, you'll be able to reference the templates in the lab, and the policies will apply as well. And then from there, let's say in this case, you pick first, you provision a VM on the lab, and then you provision a number of tasks that you do to go deploy on it, and then on RM, you'll run your automated test on it, and then if everything's fine, you'll send emails to your approvers if you have manual approvals, and then you start the same thing onto the next environment, destroy those VM, restarts new one, and basically go forward. So that's kind of, so a good point if you're doing the work manually, you're going to go either to the UI or you're going to go to Visual Studio. If you put a pipeline in place, this is basically our tool to do that. If you're using other tools for your pipeline, Chef or Puppet or whatnot, again, both Azure and the Azure Lab will be invocable the same way. So it's a choice, basically, that you have. So we're not saying you do not have to switch to everything Microsoft to try any of our features anymore. You can just go and say, if you want to use a lab with something else, then go ahead and do that. We have those full APIs available. So I'll stop here and basically just go for the next step. So as I was mentioning, we are starting a private preview. So if you're interested in joining in the private preview, actually, you can go to the Azure site. And if you go under Features and Compute on the virtual machine page, there's kind of this line at the bottom which talks about our new offering that's coming soon. So if you click there, you'll end up on our page. And actually, the URL of our page is at the bottom for Dev Test Lab. And then you can request an invite. So if you request to join, then as we go over the next couple of weeks and months, we'll bring in more and more users as we ramp up the service. The only have kind of one question there we ask is, are you looking at joining the VM trial or the container trial, basically? So we'll contact these customers at kind of differently at different points in time. If you want to look more in detail into the new SDKs and what Boris has presented, I'll turn it over to him.
So yeah, you guys, what do you guys think will be shown? Does it make sense? You like it or? Cool. So yeah, as Claude mentioned, sign up for the private preview. Happy to take you, because the more feedback we can get, the more we can build a product that meets your needs. As for what I was showing, I'd encourage you as a next step, just download the Azure SDK 2.6 if you want to play with the Azure M tools. You'll see, as I mentioned before, that we integrate more and more templates. So I was showing just a virtual machine. But if you go to GitHub right now, there is like a huge list already of very complex templates, like, for example, a full SharePoint farm or Mesos, Docker templates, and so on and so forth. So familiarize yourself with Azure RM and how you can provision environments, because this is really what we're gonna bet on going forward. And then there is one particular thing, because as Claude mentioned, we are currently working on the integration, because we start in Visual Studio, or you can start in Visual Studio. One idea is that on GitHub, you could say, hey, I have this template open in Visual Studio. How many of you have actually seen the deploy to Azure on GitHub? Okay, so there is GitHub. If you go to the GitHub repo of all the templates, there is basically a button that says deploy to Azure. And what's happening there is it just grabs the templates and provisions it in Azure. So we are thinking about putting a button next to it that says open in Visual Studio. This is because we may think, or our notion here is really people don't start from scratch. You would never start writing a template really from scratch. You would basically pick one that's closest to what you want to do, especially when you build a complex environment. So we're thinking by integrating Visual Studio into that flow and say, hey, open Visual Studio to edit your template with all the extensions and this resource outline, you might benefit from it. So the next step is really, we are really looking for your feedback on the Visual Studio tooling for Azure Resource Manager, because what I've shown today is really the first step. We have like the outline view, we have a nice IntelliSense, we have nice bracket matching, parameters, detection, and all that type of stuff. But we're at that point where we need your feedback, especially how should we integrate with this, how actually we know we need to integrate and we want to integrate because we're one team. We just need your feedback on how would your flow look like? How would you basically start with this? How would you go through it? So we also have a feedback site up there, which is basically hidden under that writing here, provide feedback for Visual Studio Azure Resource Manager tooling. And I think the slides will be made available to you, then just click on it, and if you have feedback, that'd be great. So we saved the last 10 minutes for questions, because we understand that's a new service that we announced, and you probably have some questions there.
But first, we have to beg for evaluations.
Oh, I see. Okay.
For good ones, right? Good ones.
I did that at the very beginning. Yeah, so yeah, we'll open it up to questions. So any questions? Yep.
Are there plans to add to the Azure Resource Manager deployment of Azure AD apps, specifically being able to set up, if you have a web service and a client that have a dependency, and being able to do that configuration through the Resource Manager? And then to be able to get a key, for example, for OAuth and that kind of thing?
So just to make sure I get your question right, are there plans if we make templates available where you have like server dependencies already or service dependencies?
In Azure AD.
In Azure AD?
Yeah, because right now, the only way I know to deploy an Azure AD application is through the Graph API.
Okay, so the question was if we're going to make Azure Resource Manager templates available that also cover Azure AD. I honestly don't know for sure, but I know we have a huge community engagement going on right now, because if you look at the list of templates, it's actually growing like by the hour. Okay. So I would say it's not. I would say it's very likely that we have that.
Okay. Second question is, if we're doing a nightly build where we're tearing down our environment and then we're building it out again and then hooking it up to Visual Studio Online to source control and then pushing the code for a nightly build, should we sort of source that in a workflow in Visual Studio Online to launch that process, or should we do it from PowerShell from either from a runbook or something like that, and then call the build to happen once the infrastructure is set up? Which end would you come from to do that?
Yeah, one scenario we see that's very successful so it is to start from build. So basically your build run overnight, you have your latest build. Have the build trigger a release in RM on VSO. And then have Release Manager itself kind of either provision the old one, provision the new one. They can call direct Azure or our new services, start your test, and so on and so forth. So your kind of overall orchestrator on a given stage, that would be RM, I think would be the kind of the right pattern.
So the workflow in Visual Studio Online.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, thanks.
Any other questions?
Oh, that's going to be a tough one.
Hi, Claude. One, can we plug in our own pricing? You show the nice little pricing calculator in the estimator, but everybody's kind of got different pricing. You might be on a dev test plan, or
Right.
you know, your EA may have a discount in certain rates.
So yeah. So
Is that the plan to be configurable?
So you mean the pricing that we show? Well,
Yeah.
we are not planning to do that, but that might be something that we might actually let the lab admin decide what he wants the team to see.
Okay.
There's a yeah. So that's something that we're thinking about or considering at this point. But
and then have you thought about, like, I want to work late, so I don't necessarily want to opt out of the shut off, but don't shut me off when the admin's configured everybody to shut off because I'm going to work late tonight.
right. So again, the opt-out is when you create your VMs, right? So you decide as the end user
Right, but I
if
may
you
not
want.
want to opt out. I'm running a G series, but I'm going to be working until 10 o'clock, but I don't want to leave it up over the whole weekend.
Right.
So it's basically on me to shut that down if I opt out.
Yeah, if you opt out, it's on you. I think we're going to probably create your own personal scheduling on when you shut down or not. So we're starting with a very basic set. And we have a lot of ideas, but really what I'm trying to do is implement the ones that are asked by customers for real. So that's why we're looking at bringing customer earlier in the design process. But what I think is probably, we're talking a lot with the idea of creating schedules. I have different kind of schedule for the group, for yourself, and for machines, or for tags that you can, you tag different machines with, and then associate a scheduling to that tag. So we're thinking about all these different options.
Okay. And are you thinking about like a higher level, like, this is my environment, it's composed of these 3 components.
Yeah.
I need those 3. I'm going to claim that environment, not just by VM.
Yes, so for sure, like the next step is really we're going by environment. So right now we're starting smaller with either a VM and a container, or a number of VMs. You'll be able to create multiple VMs at version 1 in the same network. But then we're going to quickly allow you to do multiple more complex VM and also PaaS and so on and so forth. So it's just a point in time question. But yeah, that is in our plans.
Okay. And the last one, you showed, this is a resource manager kind of a question.
Right.
And basically you're showing you take a VM and you can inject all these different services that you might require.
Right.
One that I'm getting asked for, and maybe it's just my limited knowledge of PowerShell and Resource Manager, is patching.
Right.
Because they spin it up and then you run 3 hours of patching because the VM maybe had set up 2 weeks ago before Patch Tuesday.
Right.
And is there a way to inject patching through Resource Management?
Yeah, so we're thinking about it, and there's ways to go around the problem. But yeah, we're thinking about it.
So the question was if there is a way to inject patching into virtual machines. So virtual machines with CRP, we think about like managed virtual machines. So through extensions, you can actually apply software to a virtual machine, what I've just done. There is going to be, I don't know if it's already available like this week, there is going to be a managed virtual machine that actually does the patching for you. So you don't need to worry about that. Right. Your operating system will be patched. We're working on that. Yeah. Yeah, we heard that feedback. And the way we think about IaaS right now is you basically start with a single VM. That's the VM you have, your VHD that you upload, and it's all yours. And then we go into like the managed VM layers. And the managed VM layer is basically you put your own software on it, but we also give you certain extensions and take care of things like patching and stuff like that. And then we will.
Yeah, the other scenario you just mentioned also from our internal usage is for demos, like spinning up a VM quickly to do some demos and killing it. Yeah.
Yep.
Any additional questions? Yeah.
So for your new labs environment, would you do a lab like for development team for product So would it be like application oriented, or would it be if you had a team who did 5 apps, would you do it all together? I'm just asking as far as especially the quotas go, and who's paying for that. You may have different business owners that are, paying for the subscription. So how would you structure that? Would you do a lab for, or would it just depend how the billing went?
Actually, that's a great question, and the idea is that there's no one answer. The idea is we're giving you that lab construct to apply to scenario A or B or C. In our case, it's one payer for DevDiv, and right now we're running everybody in one big lab. So we have like the 5,000 VM on one lab, but I can see where you might go by. Yeah, so you kind of decide how you want to break them, but you'll have a cost per lab. So if you decide to put, if you don't want to have, let's say you have 200 teams, you don't want to have 200 subscription, you could put everything in one sub where you do all your labs, and then each lab will have its own, will report how much you're spending per lab. So it's really kind of how you pay for it, how you want to share the resources and the VMs or the environments, and sharing of the templates. One thing we know, and I didn't mention, is templates themselves and components, those you'll be able to share across labs. And hopefully we'll be able to share also across accounts or across subscriptions, within the same account.
Okay.
All right.
All right. There are no other questions?
We'll stick around for a few minutes. So
Yep.
thanks, everyone.
Thanks for coming.